Welcome to Seek Reality. I'm Roberta Grimes, and I'm so happy you're with us today. My dear friends, today we have two genuine celebrities as our guests. You're not going to believe this. Raymond Moody is joining us for the second time. And not only did Dr. Moody coin the term near-death experiences, it's been almost 50 years now, but very much later, he also coined the term shared death experience, believe it or not. And more than that, Dr. Moody is like the nicest person you have ever met. And joining him today is Paul Perry, and he of the Silver Pen. He is the reason Dr. Moody's books are so easy and so delightful to read. The best reported near-death experiences provide us with some of the surest evidence that our minds can easily exist apart from our bodies. And that's all we needed to know that we, in fact, do survive death. When we combine the best near-death experiences that we have received over the past 50 years with a great volume of meticulously studied afterlife communications that we've received through the greatest deep trance mediums, especially those received in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, like Gladys Osborne Leonard, anyone? Just those two bodies of evidence all by themselves prove not only that we do survive our deaths, but they give us the best details of what the afterlife is like. And that those two bodies of evidence alone should be known by everybody now. And we would all know that we live eternally in the most beautiful place you can imagine. But sadly, still almost 90% of the people in the world are still afraid to die. And so our wonderful, beautiful friends, Raymond Moody and Paul Perry, have set out to remedy that problem. And they are doing it in style with a beautiful, wonderful book. Their new book is called Proof of Life After Life, 7 Reasons to Believe There is an Afterlife. And this book nails it. Their 7 proofs are very well chosen. They're powerful. And it's true of all the books that they write together. I can recommend their new book to you without any reservation. Everybody can read it. Everybody can understand it. It's just a wonderful book. In fact, we're starting a little late doing this taping just because I had to finish the book before I could even come on with them. Their book is conservative. In fact, I think it's a little too conservative for my taste, but that's what they should do because they're trying to convince you of something which is obvious and which is true. At the same time, the truth is overwhelming and the reality of your eternal life is beyond dispute. We'll go through these proofs with them and talk about why they're so critically important now to building the case for your own eternal survival. Raymond and Paul, welcome. Thank you so much for writing this book, which was so needed now. It is so, so good to have you with us today.
Thank you, Roberta.
Thank you very much, Roberta. It's good seeing you again, too.
It is. One of the reasons we started a little late too doing this taping is that we were reminiscing about a long time ago. We had dinner together at some conference or other. We don't remember where or when, but so we just couldn't stop talking. And finally, our wonderful Sam, our engineer who kind of keeps us all honest, said we had to get started taping. So here we are. Raymond, this is a great book. I hope everybody reads it.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you.
Well, the thing is that in order for us to really believe it, we have to know first some of the things that are in this book. Yeah. And people don't know this stuff. And it's unfortunate. I've known all of this stuff for a long time. And so when I saw what you were using for proofs, I said, oh, well, this is all going to be easy. I don't even have to read the book. And then I started reading it and I said, oh my God, you went back into some of the early stuff and you pulled out these proofs and you went through them, which to me was the right way to do it. But it took you a lot of time to do this and to dig up all this stuff. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Well, we've been working on this a long time.
I can see that.
Yeah, as you know, Roberta, I mean, I've been working on this for 50 years, and I am known as more as a medical doctor and psychiatrist. But before that, I got a PhD in philosophy, and I was a philosophy professor, and specifically, logic was one of my main specialties. And you know, coming from that background, then my book, Life After Life, was published just as I graduated from medical school. But so beginning when I started investigating these things back at East Carolina University in 69 to 72, I was talking to people. And ever since then, since I've developed a reputation for these kinds of experiences, near-death experiences, and so on, recurrently people over the years ask me, Raymond, is there any proof that this is true? And for years, my mind immediately went to Bertrand Russell and the Principia Mathematica and Wittgenstein and logic, and I would try to answer the question in terms of what I, as a professor of logic and philosophy, thought about it, and that never went anywhere with people. So I used to wonder, what is it that people want when they ask me, is there any kind of proof of this? And it's not considerations about symbolic logic or Plato or what it is. It's most of those people were either had lost a loved one to death or were facing terminal illness themselves, or just that midlife curiosity that arises. And so it took me a long time to figure out what it was they were asking for. And I think I finally figured it out. What people want is the question they ask, I think they were really trying to ask is it a rational thing to expect with confidence that when we die, there will be another set of events or another realm? And I say, from all my knowledge of philosophy and the 50 plus years of investigating this thing, I say, yeah, it is. Yeah. It is. It's a rational thing in 2023 for somebody to look at all this and to say, well, I gather there's an afterlife. And then in the background of that, see, in my mind, the big logical problems about this an important question that have been framed by Plato and Hume and other great philosophers, that is satisfied too. And I'm ready, if somebody wants to challenge me, I'm ready to go. but what most people want when they're asking for proof is just what I said. And I'm satisfied that the current state of understanding about near-death experiences, that's right. It's a rational thing to expect, I think.
Yeah, well, I think you've certainly you've done it with this book, and you've done it in, as I say, a very conservative way. Much more conservative view than you need it to be, which is probably the right way to do it.
I've always thought, Roberta, that since I was a kid, really, I've always been the kind, I want to think of the objections to something rather than the reasons for it. And the reason is, if you keep trying to knock something down rather than to prove it or whatever, then what you come out with is more satisfying in the long run, because you've really put it to a severe test.
Yeah.
And where I've been is I put it to all the severe tests and I just give up. I mean, I just can't think my way out of the statement that, to my great astonishment and still a little counterintuitive to me, but yeah, I gather there's an afterlife.
Well, let's start going down some of these, and now Paul's role in all of this. And Paul, jump in here. You have become good friends, clearly, because you work together on all of these books. And what you mainly do is kind of make them pretty, make the language quite easy to read.
I think I do more than that. It's
yeah.
I do the book side of it. Raymond does the heavy thinking. But my idea with the book is to condense it and divide it up so it's easy for people to understand and to grasp what we're trying to talk about. And that's my role with this one. But in this one, I took a greater role in a lot of ways.
Yes. Paul did a lot of research on this too. I mean, just
You
stuff
did
I didn't know about. He pulled up. So this is very much a joint product.
a great
But
job.
I mean, Raymond's been working on with this material for over 50 years. I've only been working with it for 33 years.
That's a lot.
And that's when Raymond and I first got together. When
Oh,
our
I want to correct that because I thought so yesterday but now actually it's been 35 years since
wow,
1988. Yeah.
see, it's been so long ago I can't remember when it was. And we started with the book The Light Beyond, which was his I guess it was his third book after Life After Life. And it's a book where we looked at the research that had been done since Life After Life came out. And I really expected that that would be my only book in this subject. But I kept finding things that I was interested in. And I wanted to pursue it with another book and with another book and another book. And now I've written over a dozen books on near-death experiences and 6 with Raymond and a total of 5 New York Times bestsellers.
Well, you make the books content rich, but easy for people to understand for whom this is not their field, which is, I know, a very difficult thing to do well.
Well,
So,
it is. And also, you mentioned that they're very conservative books, and I appreciate that you notice that because that's our goal, is to provide the information to people to make up their own minds.
yeah.
And they don't need to know how we feel. They need to know how they feel.
Right.
And that's really
What
our
a
focus.
good, say that again.
I can't remember what I said. Oh,
Well, this was profound. They don't need to know how you
they
feel.
don't need to know how we feel. They need to know how they feel.
That's very important. You're not trying to ram it down their throats. You're trying to give them the information so they can make up their own minds. That's why these books are so great.
And we both believe that rather than a lot of people look at this subject area and they start with disbelief.
Yes.
And they don't believe this, and when they finish reading it, they still don't believe it because that's their mindset. Our goal is to have them start with belief and then go wherever they want to go.
And also, I think, as you know too, Roberta, the very best way for people to be impressed by this or to get the sense of it is to talk to some of their own relatives or friends who've been there. See, that's what makes it more real for people. That's why, yeah, that when this information first started coming out, it had its own verification because any doctor who cared to ask among his patients or his or her patients would quickly find plenty of cases. And that's what happened.
But let's just dive in here. You start by talking about shared death experiences, which, as you define it, I guess, are basically when people are part of a death, they have a loved one involved. They're often, and you make that abundantly clear with all the rest of these, they often end up caught in the death, caught up in part and they co-experience the death with their loved one or with, even if they're just a nurse at a bedside, you can't help but become involved in the death. And I think you make that point very powerfully. So you talk about that in the beginning before you even get started. That's not even a reason to believe, but that's what you're describing, all these experiences people have had just because they were there at the time. That's quite powerful.
It is. And it also kind of knocks the air out of the sort of standard way of arguing about this, which comes to us from the Greeks, actually. Plato and the philosopher Democritus. Today we call it's like some people say, yeah, this is an indicator of an afterlife. Other people say, oh, this is oxygen deprivation to the brain. and that is that argument goes back 2,300 years. And the trouble with it is that it is a very common thing for people at the bedside of the dying who are not themselves ill or injured that as the person in the bed is dying, the bystanders themselves have all of these
Wow.
experiences that we know as a near-death experience. They may
Yeah.
say that as grandma died, I myself got out of my body and I went part way toward this light with her. I saw the
Or I
relatives.
saw her transformed in her face. I saw this or that, and the mist rose. All these things happened, even if they didn't believe in anything. They
Well,
could have
yeah, that's
experienced.
neat. I liked what you said earlier, Roberta, that they get caught up in the death.
Caught up in it. That's just a
And
great phrase.
it's a great phrase. We'll be using it from now on. But it's nice because they literally are caught up in it. They don't have any idea that this is going to happen. They don't even know what a shared death experience is, and many don't know what a near-death experience is. And then suddenly they are caught up in it.
And they're transformed by it too. You talk about how they're not the same person when they walk out of that room.
No,
That's
not at
right.
all. Yeah.
But the first of these reasons to believe is out of body experiences,
Mhm.
which I would have certainly chosen. And I think it's a very good, because they can happen. Just some people just learn how to do them and they go off
Yeah.
astral traveling all the time. I've known people, they
Yeah.
contact me all the time and talk about it.
It's a
Talk
very
about that.
common part of shared death experiences and near death experiences that people find themselves up above their body and so on.
Mhm.
But it doesn't have to occur just in the context of a death
Not
or a
at
near death.
all. No.
It's even playing great music. I've known musicians who say that while at the height of the music, when they were performing on stage, they
Mhm.
felt themselves lift out of their body and go into this light.
Or you can go to Bob Monroe's place, and you can learn how to do it on your own, and they teach people how to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like a
And
thing. You
and
can
it is something
do.
very significant for the nature of human beings. Um,
Yes.
as people often talk about, you can't really draw a logical inference from uh, a logical inference from all this to the fact that there's an afterlife. But there's one inference you can absolutely make, which I can't find any hole in this argument, and it has to do with these life reviews. People say that during their near death experience, everything else kind of disappears and they're surrounded by a videogram or a hologram, panorama of everything they've ever done. Time
Mhm.
stands still and they see everything they've ever done from the point of view of others. And what that means, Robert, and this is an ironclad inference, that at least for some of us, life is a two-phase process. We lead it forward as the protagonist or actor. Time stands still. There's a 180-degree whirl around, and we witness everything we've done, not only from our perspective, but the perspective of those with whom we've interacted.
Yes. Yes. That's huge. I agree. That's huge. But out of body experiences, too, the very fact that we can have them, we can be in a room, our body's in a room, often asleep, and we're out, having an experience
Sure.
as a pure mind. The fact that that separation can happen, and can happen even separately at will if you go through the Monroe process, that to me is huge. The fact that you chose that is huge, because they're right now. One of the I just did a blog post about how they call it the hard problem of science, because how is it that the brain produces consciousness? Well, clearly it doesn't.
Doesn't.
Right.
That's what I think. It's the doctrine that consciousness is generated by the brain
It's
is
ridiculous.
the doctrine of called epiphenomenalism, and it's not a scientific doctrine, because how are
Right.
you going to verify it? It's a philosophical question, theory,
Right.
and it's on the other hand, you can say, well, the consciousness is generated by the brain. That's what some say, but others say no. the appearance of the body is generated by the mind. Yeah, and that's
There's
how I.
another interesting problem too, which is if people are born blind, if people are born without eyeballs, and during a near-death experience, they can see.
Yeah,
That's kind of huge, don't you think?
it
All
is.
of us. Yeah.
They also say, though, that it's not like vision we're having right now. It's
No,
greatly amplified. People say, I've heard people say you have telescopic vision. It's like you can think of something over in the corner of the room and zap, you're there. Or
and it's
um,
360
and
degrees as well.
that colors that you aren't here are
Yeah.
there.
All quite amazing. But that's your first reason to believe that life continues, and I think that's kind of huge. Your second is precognitive experiences,
Yeah.
which I think is another biggie. Talk about that one.
Yeah, Paul has
Well,
really has thought that more on that than I have actually. So,
a precog experience is when a person unexpectedly sees, in this case, the death of another person, or has foreknowledge of a paranormal kind, that they know something's going to happen or that something has happened. And what we point to here is apparitions apparitions of people who see family members or friends die or know they've passed away halfway around the world. There was never any indication that they were even ill, but they'll appear to somebody, they'll appear to their friend, and they'll say, I'm going to die today, or I have died. And it turns out that they have died. That's a precognitive experience. But there's all kinds of other types too. I worked on one, a woman named Olga Gearhart in San Diego.
Right.
And she was having a heart transplant. And so her entire family showed up. She was Hispanic and she had a large and loving family. They all showed up at the hospital and they sat in the waiting room and waited for her to get her heart transplant. Everyone was there in the family except the son-in-law. The son-in-law couldn't stand to be in a hospital. So he went home and went to bed. And while he was asleep, she was having difficulty with the heart transplant. The heart kept stopping. They had to keep starting it. This went on for a long period of time, and the doctors were telling this to the family members. He woke up at about, I believe it was 3 a.m, and Olga was standing at the foot of his bed. And she said, tell everybody I'm okay, that I've had some trouble here, but I'm going to be all right. And so he got dressed. He drove down to the hospital. He told everybody what had happened and what she had said. So later on, when they went into her room after she achieved stability with her heart, the first thing she said was to her son-in-law, she said, Juan, I saw you. I went and talked to you at like 3 a.m, and I told you that I was going to be okay. So in a lot of ways, this is kind of a double shared experience, by the recipient as well as the person who's having the operation. And that's the nature of a precognitive experience.
Which is pretty amazing. I thought that was an amazing story. Yeah, you had that in
It is
the
an
book.
amazing story.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's another one.
But there's a number of cases. We drew on research from the 19th century. These, by the way, these type of paranormal experiences have been researched for hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years. And what we did with this book is we pulled them together and kind of presented them in a 21st century way. So some of the ones we examined from the 19th century were two sisters. I believe they were sisters. Let's say they were cousins, who both at the same time, the same day, dreamed that their another member of their family who was in China. These women were in England. Dreamed that he had died, and he appeared to them and said he had died. And they were both afraid, that he had died. Communications weren't good in those days. And they both received letters from the government agency that he was working for saying that he had died on that day unexpectedly. And so the researchers pulled on those letters to show that they had indeed had precognitive connection with this guy. So yeah, it's amazing. I think that's one of the more common. Maybe Raymond could jump in on that, but I think precognitive experiences of that kind, sensing that someone else has died, perhaps a loved one, are fairly common.
That is common, and I hear it all the time. And it happened to me in 1970 when I lost my first child. But 24 hours, the 2 nights before it happened, my wife and I both awoke from the same dream that we were losing the baby.
That was in the book. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, and you know it, and then one day later it happened just as in the dream. And you know, I hear this, and I know you hear this all the time too. From this is just part and parcel of the of life that, and what this deals with is, see, it's. I remember when I was 18 years old, I read a great philosophical article by a guy named McTaggart, and the title of it's a famous philosophical article, "Is Time Real?" And he gave arguments for why actually time is not real. And now my wife is incredibly brilliant. I mean, just her IQ is astronomical. And fortunately for me, she's not intellectual. Okay, what would that have been like, right? But she was an art. She went to art school. She studied the fashion, and color was her thing. And so she's just not intellectual, but very brilliant. And about maybe 5 or 6 years ago, she was standing in the living room. Remember this look on her face. And she's like, she was gazing into a great distance. And she said, "Time is not real." and you know, and people realize that the older they get, this doesn't
Pretty
make
clear,
sense.
I think.
It is weird.
Right. Yes.
And you know, people who go over to the other side say, Eben Alexander, I'm sure you know, the neurosurgeon, is a friend of mine who had a near-death experience. And Eben, I mean, you know, speaking of brilliance, okay, and Eben was a professor of neurosurgery at Harvard, I think, for 14 years. And he's just, you know, beyond brilliant. And he had a near-death experience and just this horrific infection he got. And I asked Eben, I said, "Eben, here in this world, the axes by which we orient ourselves are time and space. But people who have a near-death experience say there's no more time and space." So I said, "Well, what are the orienting axes?" And he said, "Love and knowledge." And that's pretty much what everybody says.
Yeah, that's true. That actually objectively is true. But while we're here, unfortunately, people do make appointments and in a certain place for a certain time, and we're kind of stuck with that if we want to have lives lived here. That's
you know, Roberta, our subculture that we're in, it's just too bad that, you know, it doesn't, the way it treats the what we regarded as our adversaries in this, or the skeptics. And that's just too bad, because those so-called skeptics have no idea what they're talking about. They don't even know what the word means.
It is a problem.
Skeptical,
but we will overcome it. Your book will help to overcome it, because it's a great bridge between people who are clueless and a wealth of additional information which fits neatly and ties to your book. That's part of what I love about your book, because it's sort of this is beginner knowledge which people can then bridge to more knowledge. I just love that.
Paul and I both, you know, have noticed in the last few years, especially since the COVID thing, you think about over 1 million Americans died from COVID. And you think of all the grief that brought about in the people who were left behind. And then couple with that, all these younger people coming into midlife, where it's natural to just want to know about these things.
Yes.
So that was kind of what we had in mind when we were writing this book, that is this vast number of people out there now who really haven't been exposed to this material and yet are in some kind of need for it.
Let's make sure we can finish this, because we're coming toward, not yet, but almost toward the end of our time. The third was the transforming light.
Paul?
People
Let's briefly talk about that, because I want to get to terminal lucidity, which you talk a lot about.
Okay. People are transformed by the light. They literally are. I mean, when they have a near-death experience and they see the light, it's one of the most preeminent things in the near-death experience for them. And it changes them in such a way that everybody notices it. And that's the shared aspect of this, is that everybody sees after someone has had a near-death experience, they're not the same person that they were before.
Right.
I was involved in a study one time, a transformation study was called, done in Seattle. And what the finding of this study, which was examined 400 people who had had near-death experiences, compared them to the regular population who hadn't had near-death experiences. They found that there was, number one, a decrease in death anxiety, is that they no longer had the fear of death that they did before they had before they'd had contact with the light, is what it was. They had a higher zest for living, which we defined as being type A without the anger. So,
type A without the anger is beautiful.
Right.
Yeah, I love that.
Actually. They had a higher intelligence. And once again, that may be because there's a lot of other explanations for it, but it might just be the simple act of being exposed to a supernatural world that we're all in, and things are more accessible when you've had a near-death experience. I believe this. I don't know if you do, Raymond. They're more accessible as far as education and knowledge goes than they were before. They're more open. They're more
That's
open
right.
to this. The other thing, which I found the most interesting, was that they have an increase in psychic abilities. That people who have near-death experiences have 4 times as many verifiable psychic experiences as people who have not had near-death experiences. And these are all transforming aspects of a near-death experience that are visible to other people. That's the good part of it. There's a sort of a bad part of it, that it changes them so much that I think they have a higher rate of divorce. They're no longer the same person that Jane married, and that gets in the way of their relationship. People don't know how to relate to them. We even had CEOs who had to leave their job because they were no longer the angry person that they were before they had their near-death experience, and they realized that they ruled by anger as opposed to ruling by sensibilities. So that's transformation.
Not surprising, actually. It is I think that I remember reading that part of your book, and I think that fear of death was reduced by more than 50%. For something to do that,
Yes,
is right. It's quite remarkable, because fear is a very persistent emotion, especially in midlife like that.
and it frees you up to think about other things.
Yes.
And to focus on
How
it.
amazing. Yes.
Yeah.
Now, reason number 4, terminal lucidity, which I think is a profound thing. I mean, the fact that people whose brains are literally mush are now able to suddenly, they were in a coma sometimes, in some cases. They can suddenly sit up in bed, talk normally, in some cases walk around the room.
Right.
And there's no scientific explanation for this. This is pretty amazing. And you have you talk a lot about terminal lucidity. I loved that chapter. Let's talk about that just for a few minutes. I think that's just wonderful.
I mean, let me
Well,
tell a story, and
I
then
think,
Raymond
yeah,
has a really good twist on all this, I think, with Faye as opposed to TL.
yeah, yeah. See, this
Yeah.
is nothing new, Roberta. Well,
I know
what
it's not
medicine?
new. I mean, I've done a lot
Yeah,
of research on it myself, but
yeah,
I think to
yeah.
people who don't know about it,
That's what I was going to say. That,
yeah,
people who, who are listening to this, listening to me talk now, who have, there will be many of the folks listening to us who've been there and seen it themselves. And they will say, yeah, people who have not seen this themselves are very likely to think that we're disturbed and lost our mind because it's hard to believe. It's like what happens is that people, it's grandma has been in the hospital for 6 weeks, obtunded, no response. Everybody's just sitting around the bed waiting for her to die, and suddenly she sits up. And if you've seen this, it sounds so crazy, but yeah, they have a light. It's like a clear light, not from a light bulb or from the sun, but this light. And they completely coherent. They go around the room. They tell everybody in the room, give everybody a
they
message.
remember the name
And
of
then
their
they just,
dog. They did all this stuff. Suddenly they're themselves again.
yeah. And it's astonishing to watch. I knew this guy who was a oncologist, and was telling me about a case of this where he had been treating this guy for a long time, and the guy died. And so they covered him up in the bed, and the family was standing around the bed, and all of a sudden the sheet started rustling, and the man sat up
I
and
love
talked a long time, and then he just keeled over and died. And the oncologist said to me, he said, Raymond, if those other people had been there, he said, I would have concluded I was having a hallucination. It's just that bizarre. I mean, to look at, but inspiring too. It's just astonishing when you see that.
Yeah.
I love it.
And the typical path of terminal lucidity is that someone who might be in the last throes of dementia, for instance, is suddenly awakens and has a pure lucidity in a way. They remember, years ago. They remember other relatives. They talk to individuals, as we've just said, about different things in their current life, and then everyone thinks, Grandpa's all right. He's going to be normal now, and they want to take them out of the hospital, or they start to think that they're normal, and then they end up dying. And they tend to die within, I think it's within 2 days at least, but it's generally much shorter than that. It's generally a few hours,
Yeah.
you know.
I had when this before there was any publicity about near-death experiences. I was working on a geriatric psychiatry ward
Mhm.
with demented people, and there was this patient there who had been a aircraft mechanic for the now defunct Eastern Airlines, and he had developed dementia, and he was there on the ward, and he was suffering what we call the occupational delirium. People who are demented will go back to their employment and act it out. But just one day he came and he grabbed me by the shoulders, looked deeply into my eyes, and he said, "Tunnel, light," just like that. And I always kind of felt that he must have been having such an experience while he was demented. I gather, I mean, I don't know what
Mhm.
else to think about that. It was extraordinary, though. I mean, that look in his eyes was just astonishing.
It's kind of a
Well,
it's kind of a curtain call.
Yeah,
You get one more
yeah,
chance to say what you want, and that's what it is. I think it's a very common experience.
it is. It's
And
just very common.
now
And
that
it,
if people read this, they'll say, "I have seen terminal lucidity."
that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. And it sounds extraordinary in 2023 if we went back to 1890 Everybody knew about it. When
Yeah.
people died in home rather than in the hospital, which started in the 30s, everybody knew of this phenomenon. They called it then Fey, F-E-Y. If you look in the Oxford English Dictionary, it is a state of heightened and enhanced consciousness, just portending imminent death. And so everybody knew about it because people died at home. But then we forgot about it when people started dying in the hospitals.
No,
But now
I
it's
think it's
coming back
normal. Yeah,
into
of course, it's perfectly
yeah.
normal. I think it's what happens as your energy body is naturally separating from your physical body. And therefore, once your energy mind is separated from your completely trashed brain, that's naturally you're normal again for a very brief period of time. I think that's all it is. But it is funny and kind of amazing all the same. I just love it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about reason number 5, the spontaneous muses, healings, and skills, which is
God.
a lot more common than people realize
Mhm.
following a near-death experience.
Well, tell her about Tony.
What was that, Paul?
Tell her about Tony Socorro.
Oh, yeah, music. Okay. And I want to
This is a great story. Yeah, tell that.
putting this in context, this is in Western thought from the very beginning, because Plato talks about this. It's like how people, just before they die, even if they've never had any interest whatsoever in music or poetry, will suddenly start reciting poetry or making up poetry on the spot or singing. In my very limited social network as a social phobic person. And I don't really, I'm not really very social, but in my limited circle, 2 people in my circle sang themselves out when they died. It just sang out. And it happens. And what in the world does that mean? So about now, uh, Dr. Anthony Chicoria is this wonderful man who is a PhD in physiology, an MD, an orthopedic surgeon, and a professor of orthopedic surgery at NYU, who in 1994 was struck in the neck by a bolt of lightning, had a cardiac arrest, was resuscitated by a nurse on the spot, but out of his body, went through this resort center where his family was having a family reunion, and said, he said, this is more real than this ordinary waking reality. All right, now, after he got back, Anthony, who had never had any interest in music, suddenly developed a fascination with the piano and started having a recurrent dream in which he was performing the same piece of music on the stage. And he learned how to transcribe music to transcribe the piece, and then learned how to play the piano. And now, in addition to being an orthopedic surgeon, is a concert pianist. See, and Roberta, in the consensual reality we live in, that doesn't fit.
No, not at all.
That is something from elsewhere. And there's just many of them. I know I knew this woman in Toronto years ago who was in her 70s, who came to one of my lectures with her little zipper thing that artists use to show me her paintings, which were award winning, but she had never had any interest in art until she had her near death experience. So it's this can bring about creativity experiences as well. It seems to open up people's creative
Yes.
heart. In
Yeah. It's quite amazing. It truly is.
And then there's, I'll make this quick because I know you're in a rush, but there's also Dr. Rajiv Party, who's an anesthesiologist, a heart anesthesiologist, where he takes care of people who are having heart surgery. It's a very delicate form of anesthesia. Anyway, he had an infection that led to a near-death experience. And when he came out of his extraordinary near-death experience, by the way, when he came out of it, he was left with 2 angels. Gabriel was one, and Michael's the other. Gabriel and Raphael. And he's left with these two angels who now, when he does his meditation, they counsel him. They come to him and counsel him. And they told him to quit anesthesia, quit being an anesthesiologist, and start practicing consciousness-based healing. And he had never heard of consciousness-based healing, and they wouldn't give him much of a clue as to what it was. They said you have to search for it and find out what consciousness-based healing is. So he did. He left his profession as an anesthesiologist, and he started searching for the meaning of consciousness-based healing. What he decided is that what society needs the most is addiction counseling. And so he is now working on his own practice of addiction-based healing.
And that's a remarkable story, Paul, when you think of the fact that an anesthesiologist, his object is to keep his patients unconscious.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think
so,
in his...
Who said God does not have a sense of humor?
It is funny, though. He
also
had a pain clinic. He also had a pain clinic with a number of other doctors, and they were seeing the other side of pain pills and opioids.
Yeah.
And, yeah. So he wanted no more of that.
But we have just literally like 2 minutes left. So I wonder if we also have two more reasons to go through, which if we don't talk about them on the air, that's going to make people so curious. They're going to absolutely have to buy the book. So I think we ought to sort of save these, and then you'll have to come back for another visit. Right. And that maybe is another good reason to save them, because I would love to have you back. I think this has been so much fun.
Anytime, Robert. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever laughed so much with any guests as I've laughed with the two of you. What do you want people to take away from our conversation, Raymond? And also, I also want Paula for you to tell me that as well.
Yeah. Well, the reason I was enthused about working on this book is that I just see, because of my profession, people are coming to me all the time of loss of a loved one. And I lost my first child in 1970 and still not over it. And so, in your 79, you just get into this phase where I'm finished with Raymond Moody. And I thought about this book as a way of helping all those, I know millions of people out there who are going through grief or who are entering into that midlife phase where people naturally begin to wonder about the fate of the soul at death and so on. So it's my kind of attitude toward it is public service. I think this, and so in those terms, thanks so much to all the folks listening in to us today too.
Wonderfully said. What about you, Paul?
Well, I don't think it's realistic to tell people that they shouldn't have a fear of death. I think that's a very natural thing to fear. But instead, I think we should tell them to study the literature that indicates their survival of bodily death. That all around you in any setting, there's near-death experiences and shared death experiences, and they can talk to people about that and hear their stories live as well. It's hard to figure out a way to bring up the subject, but I've done it before. I did a Denny's experiment where I was in a Denny's restaurant, and it was late at night, and we were kind of arguing at the table about whether or not there was survival of bodily death or not. So I stood up in the restaurant. Nobody shot me, and I said this. I told them what we were talking about, and asked if anyone had had any experience with near-death experiences. 15 of the 20 people had. They had either had one themselves or they had seen one in their family. Many of them didn't know what the definition of it was or what the name was, but they had these experiences. I think that's really a good way to gain knowledge. But, fear is just often a lack of knowledge. So ultimately, I just tell them to don't fear education, that education is really your friend.
Education is your friend. Beautifully said. Well, it has been such a thrill. We will have you back again if you're willing to put up
Yeah,
with this
Wonderful.
again, because this has been so much fun.
my pleasure.
And meanwhile, everyone, so thank you very much for being here. And
Thank you
meanwhile,
for having us, Roberta. It's
Thank
wonderful
you.
you did.
And thanks again to the folks listening in too.
this has been Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. I'm very glad you could be with us today. Please never forget that you are a powerful, eternal being. You never began and you never will end. And when you get that, it changes everything for the better. Next week, we're going to be talking with Kute Blackson. And those of you who have heard him before know that you're going to want to hear him again. So please be with us next week. And that's all the time we have for today. So please be with us next week again. And know, meanwhile, that this has been Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes, and please enjoy and make the most of this coming week in our one reality, always knowing every moment of your life and for eternity that you are a powerful, eternal being. You, most of all in this entire universe, you are infinitely and eternally loved.